Africa is blessed with enormous human and natural resources, but for decades, the continent has been unable to translate that into meaningful economic development for its people. Apart from poor government policies, the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the war in Russia and Ukraine, is set to weigh heavily on African economies. The World Bank predicts that growth rate in sub-Saharan Africa will fall from 4% to 3.6%, testifying to the gravity of the situation. At a time when most governments in sub-Saharan Africa are running to the IMF and World Bank for financial aid to clear their economic troubles, it begs the question to know whether the continent is on the right economic path. That is the question we shall be answering with our senior development experts right ahead. Stay with us. My guest is the first ever English news presenter and editor-in-chief of Cameroon Television. Between 1984 and 1991, he was correspondent for CNN World Report and also collaborated with the BBC World Service, the Voice of America, as well as Deutsche Welle. He is recognized as the only journalist in Cameroon to have interviewed President Paul Biya on numerous occasions. He worked at the World Bank as Director of Communications and External Affairs for Africa, piloting the Global Media Development Program, and later moved to the African Development Bank, where he worked for 4 years as the head of communications. In the year 2014, he was appointed the president of the African Media Initiative, as he also moved to the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, where he was senior advisor and communications director. Join me to welcome the man who created Cori Africa, a communications firm propagating the development agenda of Africa, as well as a visiting professor of the George Mason University in the United States of America. He studied in Cameroon at the University of Yaoundé, as well as the Universities of Syracuse and Harvard in the United States of America. He is the officer of the National Order of Merit, as well as Dutch officer of the Orange Nozzle. He is no other than Senior International Development and Governance Consultant, Eric Chinje. Eric Chinje, thank you very much for talking to Dash News, and it's a massive pleasure to have you on the program Indepth.
The pleasure is all mine, Peter. Thank you so much for inviting me.
All right. Now, ministers from the Central African sub-region and other stakeholders have been in Douala to discuss ways of using the sub-region's energy sector as a pillar for development and economic growth. This within the framework of the Central African Business Energy Forum. How important is such an initiative?
It's of critical importance. Energy is possibly the most important, in my view, the most important component of what makes life on Earth possible. One of the most important, especially modern life. But even from the beginning of times, when our parents would cut wood to generate energy, whether to light up or to cook or to, energy has always been at the heart of every social and industrial movement. Now we are at a critical turning point in the history of the planet, and every society is refocusing their attention on how to guarantee the provision of energy long term. It's not just a matter of, oh, we've got some oil, we've got wood, we've got gas, we are a petroleum producing country. No, we have, countries are beginning, whether it's because of the war in the Ukraine and what impact it has had on countries that were totally dependent on gas from the Soviet Union, could be that. But there's a realization across the world that you cannot sit back and be content with what you have, or be content with what you can import. You have to be creative. Now, in the case of Central Africa, which is a major oil-producing region, you know, they have to also be thinking about energy beyond oil. But even more importantly, how do we develop what we have? How do we develop, process, share what we have in terms of energy resources right now, especially fossil fuel, especially oil? How do we, increase the value and ensure that we can we can use the resources we have now to develop other resources that, over the long term, guarantee the provision of energy to our countries, so that we continue to have the lights we're using now, so that children continue to go to school, so that society industries continue to generate, be provided the amount of energy they need, electricity that they need. So we're at a critical turning point in the history of the world. It's not only climate change that is doing that. It is the reality of the world as we see it. And if Central Africa decides that they'll wait for others to find solutions for us, we'll never get there.
We'll never get there.
No.
Now, we have seen that despite the availability of energy resources, it's been very difficult for governments to translate that into prosperity for the local population. Why? What exactly is the reason?
Well, honestly, to answer that question, we have to go down to the basics. And going down to the basics will require a gargantuan, and it will require a major effort to understand what's going on, not only in our country but in the world. Governance is at the heart of it. Why are oil-producing countries, why have some countries used their oil resources to translate into wealth for citizens, and why have others not? Why has the United Arab Emirates, with the amount of oil they have, which is not the most in the world, but why have they created the Dubais and the Abu Dhabis of the world, and we are not able to use our oil to even build better roads? I mean, there are these fundamental questions, and all of them go back to the quality of governance, to the visionary leadership that some people produce. Dubai was Dubai because there was a visionary leader in Dubai. So it's all tied. It's all a matter of policies. It's a matter of leadership. It's a matter of the quality of people and what it is that drives certain societies and maybe does not drive others.
Now, one important aspect that has emerged from the Central African Business Forum is the role of infrastructure in boosting the energy sector. How important is this?
Well, I mean, infrastructure is the name of the game, actually. There's no way we can, when we talk about infrastructure, what we're talking about essentially is not only the provision of services, but how you ensure that those services get delivered. You use infrastructure to deliver resources, to deliver services. So you can generate all the power you have, but if you can't distribute it, you need power lines for distribution, right?
Sure.
You can develop all the energy resources you want, but if you don't have the capacity to ensure that it arrives in our homes, or it's used, so that it is the practical uses of these resources can be augmented, then there's no point. So the whole, at the heart of these social movements is infrastructure. You need infrastructure for roads. I mean, you need those roads for oil tankers to travel on. Sure. You need infrastructure, and that's only one set of infrastructure. You need infrastructure even to develop your energy potential. So infrastructure touches on all aspects of what we are talking about, and this meeting was to finally ask the question: how do we deliver those services to the people who need them? What are the fastest, cheapest, most reliable ways? So you'd hear in the coming days, weeks, and months about pipelines. We need to build pipelines so that we can move oil and gas from Chad to Cameroon Because what we have now, we do have a Chad-Cameroon oil pipeline. But what it does essentially is move Chadian oil to the shores of the Atlantic in Kribi, and then send them to the world market. That's not, we're now talking about the need for us to interact amongst ourselves. We want energy, we want to deliver those capacities to Africans within Central Africa. If it leaves Chad, why should it go to the ocean? Why should it not go to Ngole Maduka, where light is needed for kids to go to school? Why should gas not go to Kumba, so that, you know, where it's needed for cooking and so on, or for fueling cars, or for, you know, other sources of other demands for energy? Why should we not be able to do that? There are countries that produce but can't distribute.
Yeah.
You know, there are countries, of course, that need but don't have access to these products. So they were really talking about the infrastructure of distribution, the infrastructure of providing, you know, service provision. And I think if this works, if it works out well, this will be one of the most important collective action, most important collective actions that the nations of Central Africa have taken together.
Now, how important is a mutual policy towards the achievement of this particular vision? We know that the Central African sub-region has two blocks. You have the ECAS and CEMAC, which some experts say that they don't have a uniform policy. So,
well, you know, all of these things ultimately play out at the level of policy and legislation. And we're really hoping that our leaders will find the strength, the conviction, and the possibility of stopping the talk and beginning the walk. We've been talking for too long. It is time for action. And we are hoping with this forum in the energy sector, we're hoping that action will begin. As a matter of fact, one of the ministers, the minister of, from the Equatorial Guinea,
Gabriel Obiang.
Yes, Gabriel Obiang, who is in many ways at the heart of all of this whole new thinking in the Central African region, said, look, if we don't do this within the next 5 to 7 years, we will be left behind. And it is serious, because everybody's suddenly woken up to the possibility of the depletion of the natural resources that were used. Depletion of energy from coal, depletion of energy from oil and other fossil fuels, and so on. And the point is, these are not long-term eternal things. So Minister Obiang is essentially saying, let us use what we have now. Let's have a sense of urgency. Use what we have now to ensure that we can build and, you know, and anticipate the obstacles that would come with climate change, with global movements. What's happening? Who knew Russia and Ukraine would be at war today? Who knew? Who knew that Europe would have its first major war since the World War? So, you know, there's a lot of intangibles that we don't control. And that's precisely why we've got to wake up. We've got to feel that sense of urgency. We've got to come up with the right policies. You know, our governments have to know that at the heart of modern civilization is energy, and we have to work to ensure that our part of the world is not left behind.
Now, there are some experts in the sector who have blamed or they are criticizing the intention or the views by Western powers for African countries to limit the use of fossil fuel, which of course comes from their natural resources. What should the Central African sub-region do in the face of such demands?
A very, very good question. And again, that's a question that all of our leaders have to be asking. Okay. The West will do what's in the interest of the West. The East will do what's in the interest of the East. Those in Africa have to think about what's in Africa's best interest. We've got to think that and act on it. We can't wait for the others to determine where we go, how we go, when we go, and how far. So it's clear that something, even the most people who don't watch television or listen to the radio or read the newspapers, it must be clear to most people that something is happening with regard to climate change. The world is changing. And how do we anticipate, how do we prepare for the new world that is emerging? One of the very evident sectors is, again, in this area of energy. Forests are being depleted. So the village mother who woke up every morning knowing that, you know, I'll light my fire, my stove, or with the 3 stones, and you put your, you know, I'll light my fire and cook because I have wood in abundance. It used to be that. It's no longer the case. Or the guy the taxi driver who thinks, no, well, you know, I'll be driving my taxi every day. I know that, you know, it's difficult, but I can always go and buy, petrol, you know, for my car. I'll always do that. But now we're beginning to realize, oh my God, there are petrol stations that no longer have petrol. Why? Not because they don't want to have it, but because it's no longer available. Why is it no longer available? The price of everything has gone up. And why have the prices gone up? Because there's hoarding in some cases, where the producers are holding on to what they have before releasing it to the market, or where they're holding on to what they have because they're afraid that they don't have any more for themselves if they just keep exporting. So this is a time for prise de conscience, as the French would say, you know. It's time to be conscious. We can't continue to lead as if we were blind or as if we have to be told by others what to do. This is the time we must take charge of our destiny. And this CABEF forum, to me, is one of the most important events on the African continent in maybe the history of the continent. One of the most important.
Okay, now, of what push can the African Continental Free Trade Area, which of course is a flagship program of the African Union, give to initiatives like this that could stimulate development?
You know, I'm really glad you asked that question, because I don't have the sense that African journalists and the media have taken cognizance of the importance of what I call the African common market, the African Continental Free Trade Zone or area. I don't have a sense that our journalists have understood the importance of that initiative and have put it at the heart of our debates on development. So I thank you for asking that question.
Okay, sir.
What we did at CABEF, what we were trying to achieve essentially was integration of the sub-region, the integration of Central Africa. At the heart of it, it is that. If we integrate the infrastructure, especially the energy infrastructure, then we begin effectively to integrate the region or the sub-region. So that's the relationship because again, nothing more will drive regional integration, continental integration, And therefore, the continental market, that common market, nothing will drive it more than the ability to provide to all parts of the continental geography, all parts of it, the energy resources they're going to need.
Okay, now we discovered that the Central African sub-region is plagued by lots of security challenges in Cameroon, in Chad, the Democratic Republic of Congo, with the internal conflicts in the east. How do African governments navigate through this to push the economic agenda?
Very good, Peter. You're doing very well. Your questions are quite pertinent.
Thank you, sir.
These issues are inextricably linked. Security, energy, production, transformation, markets. That's the economy. That's the world of the economy. We produce, we market, we create wealth, we distribute wealth, we create employment, we bring youth. You know, Africa's emerging world of youth into the process. They're inextricably linked. If we cannot guarantee food security, if we cannot guarantee employment for youth, if we cannot guarantee quality education, quality health, and so on, we will continue to suffer insecurity. It's a byproduct of all the failures of our system. So, more oil production, improved distribution, better infrastructure that guarantees all of that, all contribute to improving the quality of life for one and all. And improving the quality of life invariably would also lead to a reduction in those elements that end up with insecurity across the land.
All right, so driving projects like this will require, of course, lots of money, and that is where we get to understand the role financial institutions can play. What role can bodies like the African Development Bank, like the World Bank, play in achieving projects like this?
You know, they are important, and again, that's a good question. They are important, those institutions, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, the IMF, you name it. They're all important, but let's not overvalue them. Their money is important, but let's not give it too much importance. A good project, an old man once told me, a good idea never lacks funding. Listen, a good idea, a well thought through idea will never lack funding. If we, just to take the CABEF project CAPS, if it is well developed, if by looking at, you develop the concept note for that project, you look at it and you say, wow, if this is done, Central Africa will be integrated. If Central Africa is integrated, you're talking about one of the fourth largest market, potentially, in Africa. And maybe the 28th in the world, if Central Africa is integrated. We will be, you know, and we start co-producing, we sell collectively, we generate wealth collectively, we facilitate the distribution of goods and services within this geographical space collectively. If all of this is done, and that note, that concept note, demonstrates that, people will be running to give the money. People will be running, begging to give the money. And especially when you tell them, no, we don't need your money for now. I'll give you a good example, small one. Ethiopia, the country of Ethiopia, needed to build a dam.
The Grand Renaissance Dam.
Yes, the Renaissance Dam. They needed to build that. Their industry was suffering for lack of energy. And because industry was suffering, Ethiopia was not producing as much as it could have, and was not then going to the market, the global market, with the kinds of goods it could have taken to generate the kind of wealth it needs to reinvigorate its economy, give jobs to its young people, improve on the quality of life in the country, and so on. So the Prime Minister at the time, Meles Zenawi, was the leader at the time, thought to himself, well, what resources do we have to allow us to provide the energy which is at the heart of our economic growth at this time? And as a matter of fact, prior to Zenawi, this whole thought process had begun. And the question was, how do we do it? He said, well, we need to build a dam. We have hydraulic potential. Let's tap into that potential, hydraulic, and bring energy to Ethiopia. And then, of course, there were all kinds of problems surrounded with it. Egypt saying, no, you can't build a dam on the Nile because it will reduce, you know, the strength of, you know, the river flowing down into Egypt. Egypt lives off the Nile, depends for most of its economy on the Nile, so you cannot touch it. And the Egyptians were supported by others, the Americans and so on, and to a large extent by some of the international organizations. So Ethiopia turned around this international so-called donors, and nobody would support it. And what do you think Ethiopia did? The leadership said, okay, Ethiopians, you want to build Ethiopia? You want to ensure that we can generate wealth, that our industries can transform products? You want to do that? Let's build a dam. And every Ethiopian has to put their hands in their pocket. That's exactly what they did. That's exactly what they did. And Gibe was built. The Renaissance Dam. Where did the money come from? From Ethiopia.
Internally, from Ethiopia.
Yes, so, you know, I was saying if we moved away from that mentality of dependence, if we moved away from the mentality of importation of everything good, and, you know, moved away from respecting what we produce, if we could just, you know, believe in ourselves, turn to ourselves for what we need the most, we will find the strength, the ideas, the resources to build what we need. And I can tell you, I worked for the World Bank, right? You know that.
Yeah.
And the African Development Bank. These institutions go to parts of the world, like Latin America, and they find ready-made projects. And if they want to impose an idea, they're told outright, you're not welcome here.
They work on the terms of
the countries.
Of the countries.
When they come to Africa, they are amongst the top first to want to suggest an idea and then ultimately impose that idea.
Is it a mentality problem?
It's a mentality problem.
On Africans, or they are being coerced by hidden forces from the West? No,
I think it's one, a mentality problem, two, an inability to be prepared, or an unwillingness to do the hard work. It's all of that. It's all of that. Africans can do it, but we have to believe in ourselves.
Okay, you worked for the World Bank and the African Development Bank, where you were part of initiatives to project the African continent. You engaged Africans over the years to project the continent in a positive light. When you look back at your contribution, what will you say about the implementation? Has it been successful?
You know, in many ways I failed, and in many ways the bank failed. Because if we did, in 60 years that we've been engaged with Africa, if we did what we had to do, the continent will be in a different place today. I don't think we ever fully engaged with Africans as we should have, and that continues to be the case. If you asked me, in the years I was at the bank, and either the World Bank or the African Development Bank, if you asked me, what have been your achievements? Give us a good story. Give us a good development achievement. I'll be hard-pressed to find it. I remember some years when at the end of the year we had to produce some papers on some of our best works. You know, realizations in Africa. And I remember for almost 3 years in a row, the only thing we could find was microfinance, achievements in microfinance. Microfinance, you could take $2 million and run a good microfinance initiative in any country. At the time, our most successful, there were two. Something we called MASAF, I'm talking about the World Bank now, and something that we called TASAF. TASAF was the Tanzania Action Social Fund. MASAF was the Malawi Social Action Fund. And these were not $10 million. They were chicken feed, if you want. And yet to those countries who were giving billions or hundreds of millions of dollars, let me say, hundreds of millions of dollars at the time, were giving hundreds of millions of dollars, and when it came to success, we were looking at $2 million or $3 million projects that were successful. So, you know, my answer to your question is yes, even as a communication specialist in the World Bank, head of communications for the African region, I don't think I succeeded. And I didn't succeed because the institution was stubborn. The bank wasn't listening. Even my vice president, the guy in charge of the Africa region of the bank at the time, and the president of the bank, Mr. Wolfenson, I have to give him credit. Paix à son âme, as they say in French, you know, peace to him, because he passed away. May his soul rest in peace. Wolfenson said, you guys don't listen. When you go out there, listen. Come back with what you're hearing and structure your programs and projects based on what you heard. No, the bank was not a listening bank. Not in Africa. In Asia, they were listening. In Latin America, they were listening. In Eastern Europe, they were listening. In the Far East, they were listening. But in Africa, they were not. And that's the problem. And continues in many ways to be the problem. I hate to say this about an institution that personally helped me. I grew a lot in that institution. As a man, as a family man, as an intellectual, professional man. But I must say what I'm saying because I want Africans to wake up. Yesterday, you know, at the CABEF meeting, I was telling, after we had finished discussing the infrastructure projects and everything that CABEF stands for, I told the ministers, I said, Mr. Ministers, they were all male, they were all men. There was no female minister. So, Monsieur le Ministre, I said, go back, talk to your Minister of Finance and talk to your Minister of the Economy and let them tell the World Bank, this is the project we want. The bank will finance it. If your governments can decide that this, for the next year, this is what we want done, and nothing else, don't come talking to us about sending children to school. We don't want to send children to school if we cannot generate an economy that will absorb them when they come out of school. So don't talk to us about sending children to school. Every parent who earns $1 would want to send their child to school and pay for it, even those who sell by the roadside. So don't talk to us about children going to school. We love to send our children to school. We work to send our children to school. But we've been doing that for 60 years. It's not given us much of an economy. Now, we want to build an economy. This CAPS project from CABEF, that's what we want. It will be funded. if the bank realizes there's no entry point into Africa, into Central Africa, without that, they'll fund it.
All right. Now, communication is an important development catalyst, and for many years, the African continent has been structured communication-wise as a continent that is backward, where the people cannot think for themselves, as a continent where most of the countries run to the IMF and the World Bank for aid. Do you think that the time has come for that to change?
Of course. Of course. I wish it changed 50 years ago. I wish it could change now. We say it's never too late to change. I wish it could change now. I wish you, as the journalist, could do your homework and realize that we do not need
Western support or micro.
We do not need these financial institutions to tell us what to do. We need support from them because they could provide financing at a low interest rate, but we need it to do what we want, not what they want. They need to be able to give us. The World Bank doesn't give money for free. So as an institution, they need to be giving out loans. The African Development Bank needs to give out loans. But it should not be on their terms, it should be on our terms, because we take their money and we promise to pay back. And you, the journalists, should be telling our leaders and our communities, our societies, our citizens, that the World Bank works for us, not the other way around. We don't work for them. Right now, we are working for them. We're working for the African Development Bank. Africa works for these international institutions. We're working for the French Development Agency, AFD, but they keep telling us, oh, you know, we've gotten, you know, this is some money support from the international community.
The international community.
Yeah. I beg your pardon.
Now, you are the CEO of Cori Africa, a communication firm specialized in changing the narrative about Africa. What have you been doing so far concerning this?
I've had to put Cori on hold, the activities, for a very simple reason. I came to Cori from the African Media Initiative. Again, this was a continental organization set up to provide media in Africa, African media professionals, the wherewithal to play that role, that central role in continental development, in the development of the continent. We're supposed to play that role. And AMI was supposed to help in providing the training, providing the resources, and moving media in Africa to the center of the development agenda. That is what AMI was supposed to do. But AMI, the African Media Initiative, was funded by Western donors, by the Gates, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, by Omedia, by the Norwegian development agency NORAD. You know, they were not, we were just simple players in the game. Those who pulled the strings were not us. So we did what we could to provide media what it needed to play that central role. And then, of course, these Western agencies, and I don't blame them, it's not their fault, but they got to a point where they decided, no, we'll pull the plugs, we're going to end our support for these initiatives. Maybe it was evidence of the success of what we were trying to do, But they decided at one time, no, this is not what they're going to support. And the funding, you know, literally just evaporated. And so I came back home to Cameroon and tried to create this outfit called Corrie. But, you know, we don't have the kinds of resources we need to move it forward. Yeah. So that's where we are.
Okay. All right, now, how should Africa communicate differently in a way that promotes the development agenda of the continent?
Yeah. If I asked you as a journalist, what are the 2 or 3 things that you would do differently in the media to support growth and economic development in Africa? What are the 2 or 3 things? What are the core messages that you want to put out there to support development on the continent? What are those? And yet every journalist ought to be asking themselves that every day and ensuring that your work is structured in a way that supports that agenda. That's how it should be. So you and I are talking today. You should be, what we are doing now should be answering that question in your mind. What can I do to support development on the continent? Is what we are saying now in support of that objective. And if it isn't, drop it. If it does, enhance what you're doing. Scale it up. So that's the difference. The media in Africa, in my view, is not equipped to do the work it should be doing. You all are not equipped to do the work you should be doing. You should not be, you know, you should cover agriculture, but ask the question, how does this enhance the quality of life on the continent? How does it? Is what we are doing the right thing to do? Why do we have, all of a sudden found out we had watermelon in huge quantities, laid to waste because we can't process watermelon.
2 years back it was tomatoes.
Yes.
That was everywhere.
There have been tomatoes, same thing. Now I'm told even pineapples and stuff like that. That's it. So our journalists should be asking questions. They should be looking at the economy and saying, what is missing? What are we doing right or doing wrong? Or what are we not doing? Those questions we should be asking ourselves as media professionals constantly. Constantly. What do we produce in abundance in Cameroon today? What? On the one hand. How are we managing what we produce in abundance? How are we adding value to what we produce in abundance? How are we transforming to higher quality products what we have in abundance? These are questions we should be asking ourselves constantly and looking for those answers. And if the answers are not forthcoming, going to where we can find those answers. We should be asking the Minister of Agriculture. We should be asking the Minister of Fisheries. We should be asking the Minister of Industries. We should be asking the Minister of Finance. We should be asking the Minister of Economic Planning. We should be asking the Minister of Tourism, and so on and so forth. Let these people be challenged to give us the answers to the questions we have. But if we're not asking the right questions, we'll never get the right answers. And if we're not getting the right answers, we're stuck where we are. We're stuck where we are. And that's why I give media on this continent, or in Central Africa, let's stay within Central Africa, a very low grade. A very low grade. There's some good quality journalists on this, you know, on this continent, but I don't know that you all are doing what you should be doing in any degree of excellence, towards any degree of excellence. And we need that. Okay. You look disappointed, but
no, I don't look disappointed. Yeah, okay. I want to put the question.
Please.
Don't you think that the nomenclature, the way in which the media operates, the environment which the media operates, does not permit it to fully accomplish its mission here in Africa, particularly in Central Africa?
You know, I hear a lot of journalists say that, and then pat themselves in the back. You know. or very easily dismiss
the
problem because, you know, it's the easiest way out, rather than trying to dig deep to find the right answers.
And face the problem.
You know, and yes, I'm trying to answer deal with the problem. So my thinking is, hard work is required of many of our journalists, and unfortunately many are not ready to do the work. A lot of reading, equipping yourselves, understanding your environment. Well, a lot of that is demanded of the journalists, and very few are willing to rise to that occasion, and that's the problem. I gave up reading newspapers in the country. I take a minute or two just to glance through them quickly, headlines, because I ask myself constantly, okay, at the end of the week, at the end of the month, at the end of 6 months, with what we are reading every day, how would that move us forward? How would that move us forward? Why is there still so much corruption in our society? Are we so totally incapable of exposing the problems in ways that are credible? Is it such a hard, you know, equation? I don't know. So, we've got work to do.
Okay. Now, moving away from communication, it's been discovered that most African countries dedicate a large part of their budget to security rather than socio-economic aspect of it. Do you think that needs to change in a bit also to accompany the development drive of the continent?
And, you know, again, a very good question. I think, you know, the media should not only accompany the development process, but in many aspects should provide leadership. Leadership in ideas, leadership in social debates, leadership in that
stimulating the critical
social dialogue.
discussions.
Yes, to have the critical, to examine the critical issues that are pertinent to development. If I were to ask, and those watching, if there are any journalists amongst them, ask yourselves the question, how well do I understand the development agenda of the country today in Cameroon? As a journalist, I want to ask myself, do I know what drives policy, development policy in the country today? Is that budget, the next budget coming out, going to focus on tourism, on food, on the transformation of agricultural products, on infrastructure, in health, education, and so on? What orientation is Mr. Biya giving to the economic development of this country? How many journalists know that? And if you don't, then what are you doing? What are you telling citizens? And if you can't look yourselves in the mirror and say, I don't know what I'm talking about, until we know that we don't know what we're talking about, we're in problems.
We're in problems and we'll come overhead.
Exactly. So that's it.
All right, Eric Chinje, thank you very much for talking to us. I must say it was an edifying edition of the program, a program that has spoken to me personally, the media, and of course the audience. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Peter, and I really hope that you know, you can continue to do this and open up the minds of your audience and of citizens everywhere to the real issues that face our country. Right now, we have a declining quality in our educational systems. Our health infrastructure is declining. This is true. The quality of life in our country, in our dear Cameroon, has declined significantly over the years. These things, we should be looking at them. I mean, I was driving in Douala, and the driver got to a place where there was a traffic jam, and they were literally crossing over the sidewalks,
and pavements,
and going in all directions. We should be, media should be focusing on that, asking the police, why are you not, doing something about this? Asking those in charge of road signs, why are you not putting the road signs? Why are you, look at the potholes in Douala, in our biggest city. Look at the chaos in urban infrastructure. I'm driving around Douala and wondering, my goodness, what happened? Even in the new areas of the city, still no structure, no streets. Where are we? What is happening? Why are we not asking? I see a lot of sensational journalism in our media, but why are we not asking the right questions? Why are we not asking the right questions to the mayor, to the police chief, to the business person, to the unemployed youth, to the buy and sell and by the roadside? Why are we not going to these people and saying, why aren't you doing things differently? Why are you at this state and at this stage in your development unable to rise above your mundane everyday things? So thank you for coming, for asking me to come.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm glad to have been here. But Peter, you all have a lot of work to do. Media is at the heart of our development processes. And it's not the media machines, it's not the cameras, it's the journalists, it's the program producers who will make a difference. Use this equipment to make a difference. So I thank you and good luck.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
And to you, televiewers, it was a pleasure being with you in this edition of the program. Until next time, it's bye-bye.